In a previous video, Am I Happy? I discussed the subject of doing what is right for you by asking yourself that very question. Now, despite the fact that sometimes the decisions you make for that to happen may not please everyone, I used the specific example of a couple in a relationship with a 40-year age gap. I also mentioned that I wasn't going to get into the subtle nuances, whether it's right or wrong, good or bad, in that video. However, I'm going to do that here because it's no good covering one side of a scenario and not making reference to the other side, as this creates a bias that leans in a particular direction. So instead, it's always better to look at both in order to gain an informed, intelligent perspective, taking into account the various different aspects of the topics, because to every upside, there usually is a downside. Now, to recap, I mentioned a couple with a 40-year age gap who were very sincere towards one another. It was genuine. They were very much indeed in love, and they lived a happy life where they eventually got married and recently had a baby. Now, the guy concerned was a Mark called Mark Thornton from a YouTube channel, Every Man Has a Story. It was one of his videos that made me aware of the Philippines almost 4 years ago, where both of them were sat outside their apartment in, I think it was the Dumaguete area, and talking honestly and openly about how they met, their age gap, and their relationship. And I strongly recommend watching those videos if you can. Now, unfortunately, I became aware of a significant change to their circumstances shortly after I uploaded my video. During the few days that I was scripting that particular video, Mark unexpectedly passed away, changing the whole dynamics of the situation, leaving behind his beautiful wife, who is, I think, in her mid-late 20s, and a child who's only a few months old. And this is where the contentious issue of large age gaps reveals its downside. Now, you now have a situation where he will no longer be present to be the father figure of or man of that family, or be able to lead and advise and to guide both of them. A child will now grow up without ever knowing its father, other than through the digital footprint left behind, which in itself is actually quite significant in this particular case, but in many other cases it wouldn't be. Now, you could have been forgiven for assuming that Mark, who was around the age of, I think, 68, 69, who would have at very least been able to have seen his son reach perhaps the age of 10, or if he was really lucky, maybe into his teens. Now, although this is not ideal, at least there would have been some kind of bond or connection that would have formed on a person-to-person basis. Now, in relationships of a similar age, you tend to grow together at the same pace, with the similar experience of life. And whilst it's possible to lose a partner at any age and stage in life, on average, a woman in her mid-20s, most of the time, will get to spend her 30s and her 40s and her 50s and so on with her partner. Now, here, of course, this will not be the case. Now, you could argue that if roughly half of all marriages nowadays fail, then whether there's an age gap or not, that half that fail won't do either. But at least the father will still be around to have the guidance and input in raising the child, certainly until adulthood, even beyond. Another point to mention here is that in a case like this, where there is a single mom with a child, unless there is a financial safety net put in place, this could also be a serious problem. However, in this case, it seems that Mark was switched on enough and had the foresight to make sure that in the event of this particular situation occurring, his wife and child will be covered by Social Security. However, I've heard of numerous cases like this where this hasn't been put in place, and you don't need me to tell you the impact of that. The point I'm trying to make is this. It's all too easy to focus on the here and now when you're riding the crest of a wave of a tsunami of yumminess. You're in love, and as far as you're both concerned, it's together forever, like two swans, just circling a lake. A young woman has given you the best years of her life, her beauty, her naivety to some extent, and all of that together can be very alluring, almost like an aphrodisiac. And in exchange, you give her a sense of stability, direction, together with maturity and financial security. This exchange has been a common one since the beginning of time, and those neuropeptides are smashing through your bloodstream, tweaking your erogenous zones, which scientists have long proven that this has a similar effect on the brain as if you were taking invisible lines of cocaine. And as you move forward together, pledging your undying love for one another, the brain has an uncanny knack of diminishing the risk side of the equation, even blocking it out completely in some instances to support our chosen narrative, to fuel our own fantasies. But as this particular set of circumstances has shown, there is a very serious consequence that can, will, and does happen, and sometimes sooner than you think. This sharply brings into focus the fragility of each of our lives, especially when you start to age, and it's all too important to be overlooked or brushed aside as a very sobering flip side to the happiness that we seek. And it's on this basis that it's too important not to be given the courtesy and respect that it deserves. This is not a debate about whether it's right or wrong, because when two adults are sincere and they are genuinely happy together, how can it be wrong? But more about intelligently assessing the ramifications if you happen to find yourself in this kind of situation. It does, however, when taking into account all that I've mentioned above, start to seem ideally impractical.